right, our very last note packet on this chapter is energy resources. So it's a little bit of a longer one, but I'm going to go as quickly as I can because you will be doing a project on this, so you're going to have to do some research on at least one of these sources on your own. So I'm not going to spend too crazy much time here. All right, so definition of an energy resource is a natural resource that can be converted by humans into other forms of energy. So in order to do some kind of work. So we talked about conversions, how we take electrical energy and make it into, sound energy, or we take kinetic energy and make it into electrical, so on and so forth. So we have some different resources. And we're going to split them into renewable and non-renewable. So last year when we talked about a couple different topics with resources, whether in the ocean or with when we talked about rocks and minerals and stuff like that, we talked about things that were non-renewable, which means that they don't come back fast enough that, once we use them, essentially they're gone because they take millions of years to replace themselves. Or we have renewable, which means that they do replace themselves, or it's a very plentiful supply that we don't have to worry about running out. So we're going to start with renewable. Like we said, it takes a long time to replace them. And the most important one that we have is fossil fuels. So fossil fuels form essentially from old organic matter, so dead plants and animals from way back that after a lot of heat and pressure have been formed into some kind of form of fossil fuel. Okay, so apparently that's on this slide too. So like I said, millions of years ago, plants and animals that died, buried, all that heat and pressure is going to change them into a different substance, and all the energy that is stored from the sun by the plants, and all of the energy that the animals get from eating plants and other organisms is stored inside of them, and as it's compacted into that fossil fuel, that energy is within them as chemical energy. So some examples we have are coal, petroleum, natural gas, oil. They're all examples of fossil fuels that we have. So to start with coal, just one little fact that most of coal is burned to produce steam energy to run electric generators. So in this case, that chemical energy is made into kinetic energy because the steam starts to turn turbines, which then is converted into electric energy. That's pretty common around here. Petroleum, which is essentially a lot of it is used to make gasoline. Some also kerosene and wax, some other fibers and stuff that we have in clothing, but it's another fossil fuel we have. So something that's a really big study for scientists is trying to find an alternative to this, because obviously we will run out eventually, and gasoline is used very excessively. People use gas all the time, so we need to find an alternative before we run out of this kind of stuff. Natural gas, if you've ever heard, if you have a gas leak, this is what they're talking about, natural gas. It's used in heating systems. If you have a gas stove, you're going to have a gas lines, that's natural gas. And it's also sometimes used as an alternative to gasoline in some vehicles. Not many, but some. It is by far the cleanest burning fossil fuel, but it's definitely not the, still it's non-renewable, and it's not the cleanest, option that we have overall. The whole point of fossil fuels is usually to create electrical energy. So we burn them, and through a certain process, depending on what you're using, it's going to create electrical energy. And it is our main source of electrical energy in the United States, is through burning of coal and oil and petroleum, natural gas. That's how we get most of the energy powered here. Nuclear energy is another non-renewable source that's not a fossil fuel. But nuclear power plants generate thermal energy. So this nuclear power is turned into thermal energy, which then boils water, and that steam turns a turbine that creates kinetic energy, which then we convert into electrical. So it takes a few steps, but by nuclear fission, which is the splitting of nuclear and radioactive atoms, it creates that nuclear energy, which then gets converted into all the different types until it gets to electrical. And obviously, if you think nuclear radioactive, it's not not the cleanest type of energy that we have, but they do regulate it well enough that it is pretty, it's fairly clean, but there's a lot of precautions that have to be taken. So now onto the renewable resources. So these are the ones that we can use, and they're going to be replaced over a relatively short period of time, so we're not super concerned about them running out. One would be solar energy. So typically our renewable resources, not necessarily, but they tend to be cleaner also for our environment. So solar energy is when they take sunlight and they convert it into electrical energy through solar cells. So you've all seen solar cells within calculators. The little bar that's at the top of the calculator, those are solar cells. They are solar powered. Some of you might have solar panels or seen them. So they take the light energy and they convert it into electrical. Also, solar energy, when it comes into your house, when the windows are open, it can naturally heat home, so it can turn light energy into thermal energy. So solar energy is a clean and renewable resource for us to use. Water energy. So this is also called hydro energy. When we have, if you've ever seen a giant water wheel or turbine on a river that's turning, or if you've seen a dam, and a lot of times they're inside the dam, but these turbines are moved by the water flowing. So as the water flows, it's going to move a turbine, which is creating kinetic energy, and then as that kinetic energy is transferred into electric. So we use that water's kinetic energy to turn a turbine that then can convert our energy into electric energy. So we take the motion, that natural motion of the water and which is already happening, and making it energy we can use. Wind energy, again, is something that naturally happens. We know that we learned last year that when we have uneven heating of the atmosphere, it causes the wind to blow because the air wants to move from one area of pressure to another. So we always are going to have these wind currents. So now we've learned that we can take advantage of these wind currents and get energy out of them. So the wind blows the windmills, which then makes kinetic energy, which then can create electric energy. So again, we're taking something that's already happening in our on our Earth and is always going to, as long as Earth is around, and using it for something that can create a cleaner energy. Geothermal energy. So again, geothermal is something that is naturally happening. If you've ever been to a place like Yellowstone or other national parks out west and where there's geysers and hot springs, there's geothermal energy there. So they use that heat underneath the crust. It's almost like hot water. Sometimes there's hot water pits. Sometimes they use the heat that's closer to the magma. But the heat from underground is then converted. Sometimes they use the actual thermal energy, but sometimes they convert it into a form of electrical energy. Biomass is using organic matter, so plants and things plants is the main focus, not really necessarily animals, to be burned to release energy. So what I'm sure you guys have all heard of is ethanol. So using ethanol in your gasoline, if you look, there's a lot of gas stations that has a little picture of corn next to the ethanol pump. And basically they take a plant, in an ethanol's case it's usually corn, and they make a fuel out of it. And they're able to burn that plant from they have energy inside them that they made and they captured from the sun, and it can be burned and release the energy that they need. So it can be taken from a chemical energy and be converted into electrical energy or whatever energy we need. Now obviously we use a lot of corn for ethanol. We do, and it's a it's a cleaner source of energy than petroleum. But we also we need corn for a lot of other things. So there's only so much we can grow. So there's other studies, and whoever studies or gets the energy form of biomass will get to see this. But there's a large grass called miscanthus, and there's other types of plants that they're working with to see what holds the most energy, so they can form new fuels out of this. So the last thing here is just some advantages and disadvantages of energy resources, because there's always going to be a good and a bad side to everything. This is part of the project you're going to be looking up when you get it assigned to you. But there's lots of pros and cons to these different energy resources. So the renewable ones, pros is that it's super renewable. If it's really concentrated energy, things like fossil fuels have a lot of energy in them that can be converted. Those are some good things about some of our sources, but some bad things could be the waste they create or the pollution that they put out. So you guys will really be getting into that and presenting to the rest of the class about some of the things that you guys learn about your resource. So to get full credit for these notes, go ahead and draw a star at the bottom right corner of the page that you're on right now so I can give you full credit.